So in this video, we're going to take apart a pile of different electronic drum pads. Mesh pads, rubber pads, cymbals, kick drums, snares, just to see what's inside and also talk a little bit about how they all work. Hey, what's up? Justin here, welcome to 65 Drums. Now, I don't know every single thing about the inner workings of electronic drums. I'll try to share what I know about them as I open each pad. There are people in the comments that know way more about this stuff than me, and you can tell everyone else the different information that maybe I missed. So as much as I'd love to spend 5 hours painfully and slowly taking apart drums and putting them back together, I want to speed up the process a little bit for the sake of the video, which is why I have a drum key drill bit. If you've never used one of these and you take apart drums and put on new mesh heads quite often, I highly recommend getting one of these because they really speed up the process. The only problem is the original one that I had right here, it doesn't actually stay in a drill because there's no notch right here, but I went on Amazon and bought a new set, and hopefully this will be a little bit more useful. Okay, so this is way more useful. I can't accidentally yank this one out of the drill. So this is from DW. It comes in a pack of 2 and it's like 15 bucks or something. I'll leave the Amazon link in the description below if you're interested. Okay, so the first pad we're gonna take apart is this one from GoEdrum. It's dual zone, 12 inches across, and it's a pretty heavy shell. So this is made of steel, and then it's got some sort of like shell wrap on the outside of it. It doesn't have the original drum head on it because I removed that to put it on a kick drum that will be taken apart in a few minutes here. But this is using a Jobeki 3-ply mesh head, the older version that they had, because it's just what I had lying around. I also have this one from Roland, which we're gonna take apart later, which is about the same size. You can sort of see the differences in approach of how they build the internals of these two pads. Okay, so now this is opened up, we can talk about the sensors inside. It's only got 2. You got a rim sensor and you have a drum head sensor. This is what that sensor looks like. It's called a piezo. Some people call them piezo's, some people call them piezos. Not exactly sure who's right there. It's a 2-layer design, and when force is applied to this piezo, it generates an electric charge. That electric charge comes from here via a 1/4-inch cable over to your drum module. The drum module then interprets that hit and figures out how hard you were playing and generates a MIDI note from that. Very, very simple design. These are like $1 each on like eBay. You've got a small piece of like a fuzzy material covering this piezo so you can't see it. And this one is in a sandwich. You have a couple of blocks of foam underneath and you have a couple of blocks of foam on top. And this is sandwiched in between those two elements. Now this is sitting on an L bracket on this shell right here. And this has actually got a little bit of isolation because they have these tiny little cymbal felts underneath where the L bracket is screwed into the shell itself. This isn't the greatest design of all time. I'd rather this to be more in the center with a different arm from every single lug so you have more even force distribution. And just in case you were wondering, this is their 8-inch shell. It's got a very, very similar design, just the shell wrap is a little bit different, and of course the size of the pad is different as well. Okay, so the next pad is this one. This is a Roland PD125. It's the snare drum that comes on Roland TD30Ks. And it's not using the original mesh head on it, just like the previous pad. Instead, I have a 2-ply black Heart Dynamics mesh head right here. I really wish Heart Dynamics didn't go bankrupt. It's got the rubber rim on it. The GoEdrum pads, they do have a rubber rim, but it is so incredibly thin that it just breaks after 1 week of use. And I'm not even kidding. This one you kind of have to remove in order to get at these drum lugs. Because this is such a thick piece of rubber, you can't really use a drill, and it's really hard to even use a drum key with this in the way. But these are a pain in the butt to put back on your snare. It's just the way it is. A thicker drum rim will be better and more durable, but it's also really hard to install. So as you can tell, I haven't cleaned this in a very, very long time. It's incredibly dirty, but hopefully a can of air will help a little bit in this area. It helped a little bit. I'm not gonna spend 10 minutes trying to clean this up. So as you can tell, this pad is drastically different from that GoEdrum one. It's got the plastic basket design. Also, it's center mounted. So not only is the drum head piezo right here, underneath of it is also the rim piezo. This can pick up positional sensing, and the GoEdrum one cannot. This is a much better design, overpriced for what it is, but it's still a very, very nice pad. It's never let me down, and I do like this quite a bit. There's nothing really connecting this to the shell. It's just being held there by the force of you tightening down all the lugs. That's what the shell looks like. It's made of wood, and this plastic basket helps like evenly distribute the force all the way around the rim, and will probably be a little bit more accurate than the GoEdrum one. They also seem to have these like little fins that sort of like clip onto the rim a little bit, and the drum head is more resting on this plastic piece than it is on the wooden rim itself. You can also remove this or just put it on a snare stand as well. Okay, so the next pad from Roland that we're going to take apart is the PDX100 pad. So don't be fooled, this is not exactly the same as the last one. It looks completely different on the inside. This is technically a newer generation, so it's supposed to give you slightly better triggering results, even though it's a little bit smaller, and it doesn't look quite as premium to me because it doesn't have the shell or anything. So let's see what's inside. Okay, so finally we have a mesh head that I haven't replaced yet. This is the original one that came with this on the Roland TD30K, and this was back when Remo made every single mesh head for all of Roland's pads, which is not exactly the case anymore. This is the internals of the pad. Very, very simple look to it. It's just a plastic basket again, but this time they made like a shell for the plastic basket made out of plastic. Even though this is plastic, this is actually very, very heavy duty. It's kind of overpriced for what it is, but man, it's very solidly built. It gives great trigger accuracy, and it actually has 3 different ways to mount this. You can put this on a snare stand, you can mount this on a drum rack with this right here, and there's also a third mounting option right there. So yeah, very versatile, great little 10-inch pad, and is very, very accurate. I also believe it has positional sensing enabled. Alright, so the next pad is a Tama Techstar pad. I've actually already taken this apart in a dedicated video, but I know not everyone has seen all 400 videos I've done, so I thought it'd be interesting to take this apart and see how an 80s E-drum pad compares to a current modern day pad. As you can see, I've got this Roland power ply mesh head right here. By the way, if you didn't know, the power ply is just the same sort of mesh head they have on their regular drum sets. That's just a brand name they use to get people to buy them for acoustic drums and stuff for conversions. Anyway, that doesn't feel drastically different from the acoustic drum head. Why, you ask? It's because you're not really feeling the playing surface as much as what's underneath of it. So you got a very thin piece of foam right here. It's kind of dense, but it's kind of sort of reminds me of a mouse pad. And underneath of that, you got this circular composite piece of wood. I got to be careful here because there's a wire underneath of this. And as you can see, we've got one single piezo right here, and it's very, very large. It's screwed into this wood plate, and there's a very, very thin piece of foam underneath of it. And it's a single zone design. Unfortunately, there's no rim piezo. This is just the drum head piezo. And it's sitting on top of these different like 6 pieces of foam. Thankfully, we've gone far, far away from this kind of design choice onto something that feels more acoustic-like. I'm going to put back on this acoustic drum head because honestly it just looks way cooler when you're using the original drum head. So it kind of sucks when you're trying to put this back together because the rim is so large that it's covering up where all of these screws have to go in. So you have to sort of like feel around and figure out where these screws go into. So we're going to move on to kick drum pads in a little bit, but let's take a break from different drum pads and start taking apart some different cymbal pads. To be honest, I used to have 2 full sets of GoEdrum cymbals, and I threw away all of those cymbals except for this one, because I couldn't really trust them. They kept breaking on me, and you'll see why in just a second. Okay, so what you're seeing right here are switches. This is the second most common sensor that you'll see in electronic drum pads. They're most commonly found in cymbals, but you will see them inside of like some snares and tom pads from companies such as Yamaha, and I believe Cymbals uses them on the SD2000 line. As you can see right here, you got one for the edge. This is also a choke strip as well, so when you pinch that, it chokes off the sound. And you have another switch for the bell area right here. Now these can't sense velocity. They don't know how hard you're hitting the cymbal. It's an on-off switch, which is why it's called a switch. It's relying off of another piezo inside of here to tell how hard you're hitting. Now, unfortunately, these switches right here, back when I got them like in 2015 or something, these were faultily constructed and they would break. They would basically always be on, and so the cymbal would think that it was constantly being choked, thus making it kind of useless. And without a mod, the cymbal would not be playable at all. I don't know if they're any good now because this was years and years ago, but that's what happened with these older cymbal types that I had. Alright, so as you can see on the back of the cymbal, you have the 2 ribbons going to this little board right here. and this is where the piezo is. It looks very similar to what they're doing on their drum pads. As you can see, that looks very similar, the same sort of foam square block right there. And the actual cymbal plastic piece kind of looks like a frisbee, to be honest. Okay, so next up we have one from Cat Percussion. This is a 3-zone ride cymbal design. It's got the Cat Percussion gray look to it. Never was a fan of this color, but let's take a look inside and see how all this works. The top of the cymbal is a big piece of plastic, and then the playing surface is this zone right here, which is made out of rubber. Alright, so this is the inside of the back of the cymbal. As you can see, you got the output right there, and you got the piezo. It doesn't have any sort of trigger foam or anything on it. It's just sitting right there with a piece of tape covering where the 2 cable wires are soldered to the piezo itself. I believe this is glued on. If so, I'm not going to take it apart, but we can at least try. Okay, so unfortunately it is glued in, so I'm not going to completely take off this piece of rubber, but at least I can peel this back and you can see that's where the edge switch is. It's that like creamish white looking strip that goes all the way around the first half of the cymbal, and then that cable goes out right here, and there's going to be a matching one going around the bell. Okay, so next up is a Roland cymbal. This is a CY12C. They only made one kind of housing for a lot of these cymbals, that way they could cut down on costs. So as you can see, there's actually another empty little socket right there, where this could be a 3-zone design if they put an extra input there and an extra sensor inside. As you can see, I've accidentally disconnected this ribbon cable. It plugs in right about there, but we got the piezo right there, and it's glued to this board, and then of course that connects to the output right there. I probably should put this back together. I gotta feed this right into this little socket right there, if I can do that without destroying the cymbal accidentally. Okay, so next up is a Cat Percussion rubber pad. You had to do at least one of these because this is kind of like back where electronic drums used to be in the 90s and stuff. So let's take a look inside of one of these guys. Okay, so this pad is a little bit more complicated than I thought it would be. So it looks like this big piece of rubber isn't the only thing going on inside of the pad. So you do have this as a base, but underneath of that, you've got this circle piece of foam. Underneath of that, you have this metal plate. And on top of the metal plate, it looks like we have a plastic plate. This looks like glass, but it's not glass. A big clear plastic plate. And on top of that is the piezo. And then when we look at this, we got the rim piezo on the bottom of the pad. I'm interested to know why they decided to put a big metal plate. Is that a common thing inside of electronic rubber pads? I'm not exactly sure. I thought it was funny how this is using buttons to hold everything together. You have the base, you have the playing surface, the white rubber piece, and you actually have to feed these little buttons through this little hole in the rubber in order to keep it together. And it is a pain in the butt. Okay, so moving on to the next thing, we're going to take apart a cymbal controller from GoEdrum. Now this is the one they're most famous for. It's only 50 bucks and it works sort of like the cymbal controller inside of a VH11 or a VH10. These are really, really nice because of how cheap they are, and they just do the job. They also make one for Yamaha and one that's compatible with Roland drum modules as well. But I'm not going to take apart this one. I'm going to take apart this one. It's the exact same thing, but they've built it into like a bottom cymbal design for a hi-hat. So you have this piece, and then you put a regular cymbal on top of it, and that turns it into a hi-hat. If you want to use this with like a CY8 or something, you can definitely do that. That's a very cheap way to make a hi-hat on an acoustic hi-hat stand. Really love this thing. Okay, so this is how it looks on the inside. You have this, which is one piece. You have a spring inside of that, and this is the output jack, which is wired to this little board right here. On the front of it, we have a little piece that covers this right here, and this is like a piston that goes up and down as you're playing on the hi-hat stand. This little piston seems to have a piece of metal that's going out like this, and it's connecting to this little gizmo right here. And as this goes up and down, it's running on a track on this little board right here, and as it goes up and down on that track, it generates a signal of some kind, which then goes to the output. The hi-hat is one thing that will make or break compatibility between different brands. So for example, you can't use a Yamaha hi-hat with a Roland drum module just because they're built completely different. Sometimes you can force like a snare to work with another brand and stuff, but you got to be really careful and really read the forums to figure out if the hi-hat from one brand you want to use still works with the drum module from a different brand. So do your research before you start combining different hi-hats with different brands. Okay, so next up we have a kick drum from Cat Percussion. I gotta say, this is not my favorite pad of all time. This is not very accurate for double kick stuff, and it's just not the greatest kick drum tower. The most interesting thing about this for me is the fact that it has an acoustic drum head on it, and it is very, very loud. And it looks like my drill is dying, so I'm going to have to use an actual drum key like a heathen. Oh, it looks like you can remove that plastic rim. Okay, so it looks like we have a big sandwich here. We have this piece of foam on top, we have a piece of foam on the bottom, and in between is this metal plate. And if you peel this back a little bit, you'll see it right there as well. And the piezo is actually connected to the back of the plate. And we've got these little circular sticky strips that are holding all this down against this frame right here. A very, very simple design, and it will take about 5 seconds to put it back together. Okay, so the second kick drum we're going to take apart is the Roland KD120. This came on my Roland TD30K, and this actually has that GoEdrum mesh head that I took from the first snare that we took apart. And then I've got this Drum Tech Pro Dot thing to protect the mesh head so I don't accidentally tear through it later. We've got a very large piece of foam right here. That's what makes this kick drum feel incredibly solid. It also comes included with lots of dust because I haven't cleaned this in eons. You can actually buy replacements of this, which I might want to do someday. If you can see right here, I don't know how easy it is to see on camera, but there's two very large divots right here because I played past the point where I had ripped through one of my kick drum heads. That's why I really recommend buying one of these, not the one from Drum Tech. This thing is way too expensive. Just go to any drum store or Sweetwater or something and buy just a protector dot, and that will really help save your mesh head in the long run, especially if you use a kick drum beater that's like really thin and can accidentally dig into a mesh head. That way this doesn't happen. And the moment you rip through a mesh head, you got to replace it right away. Don't keep playing or else this will happen. But thankfully, this isn't the sensor. This is just there to make the kick drum feel a little bit more solid. This is the very single sensor in the entire drum. It's just a piezo with a foam cone on top of it. Very simple design, but effective. And it's a very heavy kick drum as well. And believe it or not, I think the guy that invented the Roland KD120 actually works for ATV now. Okay, so finally, the last thing we're going to take apart is a sample pad. This is the Alesis SamplePad Pro. Because it's got a lot of different zones, I'm going to guess that it has quite a few piezos inside of it. It reminds me more of a laptop than the different electronic drum pads that we've been unboxing until now. As you can see, there's a lot of different boards inside of here. Got a lot of different cables going here. The back side of this pad is where all the inputs are. So as you can see, there's wiring to all of these guys, and that's why all these like cables are running back there. There should be a lot of different piezos inside of here. There's one right there. There's one right there. Those are really small. Those are actually the smallest piezos I've actually ever seen. And unfortunately, this pad suffers from pretty bad crosstalk issues where you'll hit maybe one corner of the pad, and for some reason, the exact opposite corner of the pad will accidentally fire off a trigger. But as you can see, this is the square for one of the zones. This is another square for one of the zones. I don't really have anything incredibly innovative to say about this because I'm honestly out of my depth here, but that's what it looks like inside of one of these multi-pads. Hopefully you had fun just taking a look inside of the different pads that I have lying around here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great year.